Welcome to Art and Soul, Pavilion Perspectives, presented by Photo Art Pavilion, where I go beyond the frame to meet the artist behind the lens. I'm Jessica Lempin, co-founder, co-owner of Photo Art Pavilion, and today we're diving into the stories and sparks of inspiration that shape the work of our featured art photographer. Today, I'm excited to sit down with James T. Callahan, a fine art and commercial photographer based in Freehold, New Jersey, whose work is deeply rooted in history, architecture, and the American landscape. Refined eye for light and lifelong fascination with the built environment, James approaches photography as both an artist and a storyteller, creating concept-driven series that explore place, memory, and time, from historic architecture and abandoned railroads to carefully lit studio work. His photography reflects a thoughtful, disciplined practice shaped by years of artistic inquiry and professional experience. Welcome, James, to Photo Art Pavilion, Art and Soul. How are you?
Thanks, Jessica. Boy, that's quite an intro. Thank you.
Oh, I am so happy to have you with us today. You've been
Oh, me
with Photo
too.
Art Pavilion for quite some time, and your art stands out in your category of architecture.
Oh,
So, with
great.
that, I would love to share your first image. Historic architecture, 19th century house project. This is your series. And this
Mhm.
image title is Red Italiante Victorian. Can you
Mhm.
share with us a little bit about what fascinated you to take this and what it is with the series and how it implements with the series?
Sure. This is an interest I've had since almost childhood. About the age of 11, I had a friend. They had once lived in a house kind of like this. It was about an 1860s Italianate Victorian. I was just fascinated by it from the first time I ever saw it. It had been a farmhouse, as a lot of these houses were. You know, they were built by wealthy farmers. So I've always had this interest in the Southern antebellum plantation houses from the same period. You know, we had a book in our home library. One of them was on the Old South, and I was just fascinated by these photos of these houses. And there was one in particular, Dunleith. It's in Louisiana, and it's photographed. It was taken at dusk, and so this probably is, photography is something that comes from the subconscious. As far as what you're immediately drawn to and want to photograph, and so this definitely comes from those beginnings. This house, and this is in Flemington, New Jersey. This is on Main Street. It's just got rows of these houses that just beautifully maintained. So this one, I photographed most of the houses in the town. This was, just had those winter blues. It's this time of year at sunset. You can see the sun had just gone down, and it did require a post processing and make the snow perfect around the base of it, just to bring out the right contrast and color in the house itself, and make the whites a little whiter, but not too white because you want them to have that blue of winter time. It's deep, deep winter. I decided, to probably more like 10 years ago to do, a series of these houses. And I photographed them in all the small towns that I know in my state. They all have these period houses, and a lot of them are still standing, thank God, and I actually have done work to help preserve them. I secured certification of eligibility for a house in Lawrence Township, similar kind of farmhouse. It was updated later with, Italianate details, but, it was in danger, still in danger of being demolished. But I did get the certification of eligibility, which means it can be added to the state and national historic registers.
That's exciting.
Yeah, yeah.
You're now
Yeah.
like part of history within that area. That is
Yeah,
really
I'm,
cool.
I'm I'm happy to say, yeah, I couldn't believe it. Nobody had done anything about it. And everybody's like, oh, it's so such a shame, someone should do something. Nobody had done anything. It's in 2013. And that's when a lot of these were photographed, or finished the series several years ago, at least. It's definitely very much a part of who I am.
Fantastic. You mentioned how this house almost has that feeling of like a southern house, the peaks and so on,
It's,
right? Like it
yeah,
has a little bit of that southern charm. Am I totally off?
maybe it has some of the influence, but this is a bit different. Like, there's a lot of this type of house in the Northeast.
Okay.
This is Italianate. You can tell that by the roof brackets
Ah,
and
okay.
the arches over the windows. And if you look at the end of the side, that arched attic window, and in the front, and the shutters, it's all all, and the porch also is very Italianate. You can tell this house is a bit earlier, maybe in the 1860s, because later in the 1870s and 1880s, the porches became wraparound. And then the architectural style changed a bit to Second Empire, became very popular.
Oh, this is great. So, learning a little bit more about architecture, this is your world, what you love. And for me, somebody who isn't fully, obviously, familiar with it, that's fantastic to be able to learn about the structure of this home and why it is the way it is. But you've beautifully captured this moment in time. I was going in that direction, like a Southern house, because here it is, snow on it. It's almost like a juxtaposition. But being that I'm wrong, it's okay.
Oh yeah, no, no. It's they were all similar in certain ways. The high ceilings inside. The actual rooms themselves weren't that big. It was just the height of the ceilings that made them seem so much bigger. And actually, people back then were a lot shorter than they are now. But the southern houses have a lot of European influence. They're just a bit different with the big colonnaded verandas and things like that. And there's differences between the Louisiana houses, which my special interest are very unique compared to the rest of the South. For another discussion.
Okay. No problem. Well, thank you so much for sharing this one and to get into the details of the structure. Thank you so much for that. All right, let's jump into the next image that you want to share with us. Second image that you're looking to share with us is part of your transfer series, and this one is titled Flemington Station. Can you share a little bit of the history behind this and why the scene captured your attention for this moment?
Yeah, this is, comes out of the same interest, with the 19th century houses. But this, I would say this building is more like circa 1900. I could be wrong about that. A lot of these railroad stations, the original buildings don't survive, and then they built other structures in the years after. Judging by the roof brackets, it's probably, late 19th century. The added interest here, in addition to the architecture, is the railroads. This is, the old Flemington branch of the Central Railroad of New Jersey station, and you can still see the tracks in front of it. This railroad is still active. If you look down all the way to the left there, you can see the former baggage house, the baggage depot. And they used to run passenger service on this, which has not been since 1953. That was where the baggage would go. So they do run weekend excursions from this now. There's from here to Ringo's, which is the next station down. It's like like a little tourist train. I actually rode that as a kid. My dad used to take us up here, and there's an old steam locomotive which still runs on the line, and we rode that as kids. So many years later to photograph. Basically, the draw here is it's a railroad depot, and a lot of these are not standing anymore. When they stopped the passenger service, whatever reason, a lot of them were just bulldozed. They just took them down. But there are some of them left, which is really cool. I originally, photographed it, and I was getting my master's degree in photography at the time, my MFA, and I took a course called Alternative Processes. So I was really interested in getting back into handmade photography like I had learned in high school, black and white darkroom. This one is a transfer where I developed a process with the help of my professor in the course. Basically, I'll try and be quick about this. You'd make a color copy at Staples. I'd do it in pieces because I wanted these to be large. So I'd make a color copy. I'd put it together so everything lined up. You put like clear contact paper on it, like you do for your kitchen cabinets. Put that on the color part of the image. Press it down really good. Let it sit overnight. And the next day you come back, put it in water, and you can actually rub off the paper backing. Okay, so you're left with just the color, transferred color image. Then I would take some Mod Podge. I put it on big design sketchbooks. It has a texture to it. So I'd glue it to that, again, let it sit. And then I would brush it, melt wax and brush wax over it, and then take a blow dryer. And then you got to go back once the wax is dry and just very carefully just go through the whole image so that it gives this kind of look that you see on the screen. Otherwise, you just see the brush strokes and the wax. That's no fun. And then eventually I would scan the image and make up a fine art print. Gives it a really nice look. It's still photography because, as Madonna's photographer said, I forget his name, there's a quote that I read when I first started my master's program. He said he was a painter, then he switched to photography. He said, I don't want to have to apologize for photography. Kind of always stuck in my head. But yeah, so that's transfer series. That's how I did those.
A little bit more of an abstract. It just creates such a different styling than just a straight up capture. So this is the artistic side of photography. We are a medium that can be altered, that can be influenced by other outlets of
Right. And
creativity.
where I
And
really
this is
got the
one.
idea for this was from encaustic, which is
Yep.
actually, pigmented wax. And I've seen some amazing works with artists using that medium. So I was kind of thinking of something like that. That's why I put the wax on it, but also gave it more of like an impressionistic kind of feel. And I was also very much influenced by the photo secessionists, Alfred Stieglitz and all those photographers in the late 19th century that developed this etching process. And they were using all kinds of nasty chemicals back then. Now, there's a water-based version of it you can do, but they made these beautiful ethereal looking photographs. I really, really love the look of those because they were trying to elevate photography to the level of, painting and fine art. Because back in the 19th century, people were like, you don't need any talent to do this. You just
Yeah.
push a button and it makes a picture. Where's the talent in that? So, rail against that stigma that photography had.
I still feel like that conversation's still happening.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, this is such a great overall composition. And also your lighting on the building just
Yeah.
commands front stage. And I think that's great. And then your leading lines do lead you throughout the scene itself. So your eyes are constantly moving within this,
Yeah.
but yet you
This
still have that center gravity.
And this was the same time of year when the sun, hits the building just like that. Faintly see the railroad tracks and just that little bit of
Just
light
enough.
on the baggage depot. It's everything.
Next image is Reflections on the American Small Town series. And this title is Broad Street #2, Red Bank, New Jersey. James, can you share a little bit about what's going on in this scene and the way you created this? Because you definitely
Sure.
have a lot of different layering going on. And I would love to know the idea behind it all. It's beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so
Well,
much. These were all made with reflections in the windows along the main streets in these towns. It was my thesis series for my MFA and used the small historic towns making these pictures. So the whole concept was, a sense of place. And it also stems from my interest in historic architecture and history of the towns. Started out looking for a thesis project and I started, I guess, photographing in these towns. And then at one point, I started using reflections just to try, that's something we use in photography. And my professor at the time said, "Hey, that's really interesting. You might consider developing that." That's how it started. Very long, very wide, thin panoramic images. When I started this part of the series, initially they were portrait oriented, and then I changed to panoramic format because I've always had an interest in cinematic image format. Some of the windows had, dividers in them, and I actually ended up kind of getting rid of that because I just wanted a more continuous image like what you see here. This was probably about the culmination of a couple of years' work at least getting to this point. And so the image is reversed because they're reflections. Basically, there's no layering. Earlier on, there was a couple images, when they were still in portrait orientation that had layered some stuff in there. And I said, you know what? I don't want to do that. I want it to be exactly what I compose in the viewfinder. People often say like, "Oh, would you do that in Photoshop?" No. Well, yes, the post-processing, and also there's texture layered on these because I wanted, with the photo secessionists, the pictorialist movement, I wanted that aesthetic to it. So what I did is I would photograph in each place texture, whether it was a wall or the side of a building or something that looked like an interesting texture, and then that I would layer over the image. And I also did that just to mention with the transfer series. Those also have that same kind of photographed in place texture, pictorialist sort of feel. What I did is I photographed 3 exposures in thirds, and then I blend those exposures together. Back then in 2012, 2013, I had to do it by hand. Lightroom, shortly thereafter, it came out with the ability to create HDR images, and I A/B'd them. I said, well, they both look good, but it was much quicker to do it with, the Lightroom, do whatever kind of retouching needed to be done and, enhance the color. But I basically wanted the image as I saw it. So this is like the one everybody really loves out of the whole series.
The more I keep looking, like digging into each section,
Mhm.
you have circles in each third. Are you aware of like this connection? So you have a circle in this frame here. You have circles here that lead to the clock, which then lead over here. And
Mhm.
then it's like a series of circles all around. And like, I don't know, my brain is like lighting up how exciting that is to be able to
Oh,
have
sure.
that. So not only do you have the connection of being in the same town and then blending them, but they all have an element that matches. And I think that's kind of cool. It's like a fun way to see it, right? It's a different way to see it.
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody's got their own takeaway from
Yes.
art. And so that's
Art.
not anything that I did consciously. What you see here is just what was looking at, one side, then the middle, then the right, and say, okay, composing this kind of work. And this one just happened to have those colored circles in it. And a few of the other ones do as well. With the MFA program, they didn't want us just photographing one day because every day you're different. Your mind is different. Your body's different.
The
The
lighting is
lighting
different.
are different. When you photograph a subject, it's best really to go back repeatedly and not just over a few days or weeks, but over in different seasons. That's really where you start to get the feeling for a subject, so
Think that's the beauty of art, right? Everyone
absolutely.
has their own way of seeing it, connecting with
Yes.
it, and interpreting what it is that you've shared with them. And this is
Yeah.
definitely one of those pieces that will keep and hold somebody's interest. And is it fun as an artist to be able to hear other people's way of
Oh,
seeing the
absolutely.
work? And then it's like you just have a different way of viewing your own work. Because, right, as artists, we all kind of gravitate to certain elements within what we've created or what we're sharing, and to have somebody else's perception into it just makes you see things just a little bit different. And also it's kind of interesting to see how people take it
Absolutely. And that's a big part of the artistic process
mm-hmm.
is, when I created these, I had I worked with my peers
Mm-hmm.
because, we needed each other's feedback. And that, definitely helps to get other sets of eyes, on your work. And even afterwards, when you're exhibiting or having other people look at it, that it really, like, as you said, it's really interesting to get people's different, perspectives and takeaways.
But let's jump into your final image. So we have the series is called The Urban Industrial Landscape Before and After with Right Reading Reflection. The first one on top is Bond Street Towers #1, and below is Bond Street Towers #2. So would you like to share a little bit about what inspired you to do this and your meaning behind capturing the same locations and time periods?
This is actually an outgrowth. It's a continuation of the Reflections series in that the top image is a reflection in a window down the street from where the building is. And actually, I should have had in the title, this is Asbury Park, New Jersey. Okay, so this is another town I've spent a lot of time in since childhood, and it's really gone through a lot of changes. And it's got very unique architecture, though. It's more like 1900. It's a little bit later than what we were looking at earlier, because that's really a lot of the buildings were built, in the early 1900s. So anyway, I continued the Reflection series for about a year after I finished my graduate studies.
Mm-hmm.
And I got away from the texture. I didn't want that anymore. I wanted clear looking photographs, but I changed something with them. And what I did is instead of just, say, okay, well, here it is, the reversed image. I would shoot it, compose it, and then reverse it horizontally to right reading. So that top image there, that's how you would see it if you were looking at it. Okay. But I photographed it from a window down the street. Okay. It was kind of a tiny window too. I had to hold my camera up, get on my tiptoes to do it. But it was so perfect. That's what I wanted to do. And that's what I started doing with the reflections, was reversing them to right reading. So it makes a picture that you would see as if you were standing there looking at the subject that in no way you could ever actually just photograph by just making a straight capture, because it's a reflected image. That's what I started doing, in the last part of the Reflection series. Now, the one below it was actually like still in the master's program, and we were encouraged to experiment, just do something different. So this wasn't terribly different, but I decided to just go out and make straight pictures instead of looking for reflections. So that bottom one there is of the same block, but about a little over 2 years earlier. Probably like 2013, somewhere this time of year. And then the top one was in the spring of 2015, I think. So here, the top one is newer because you can see the scaffold they're redeveloping that building. So I have to get rid of some things on the street because I didn't want anything. I didn't want cars. There's always cars parked there. I just don't want cars. I just don't want to get rid of those. And a lot of times, I even got rid of if there's people. And when I had my final review from my MFA, the head of the department at the time goes, I wanted to ask you, like, how come you have no people in your pictures? There's no people anywhere. I said, well, I just really am not a people photographer. It's about the architecture. It's about the place. And really, I guess you could say, like, well, people are part of the place. You get a feel for that, by seeing the people. But for me, I just did the buildings. And with that, I kind of like, it reminds me of photos from the late 19th century before they had fast shutter speeds. You'll see landscape photos of, like in Paris, there's one in my mind specifically, and there's nobody on the streets.
No, it's a long exposure. Nobody stays
Right.
long enough.
So the people were moving too fast to register, and it's really interesting. Actually, there was one of New York City, I found, and I think I showed it to my mom, who came to New York in the 1950s, and she said, "There's no people. How come there's no people in it?" I was like, "Well, because mom, they didn't have fast enough shutter speeds back then to capture the people, so it looks like there's nobody there." Which is, I'll always love that effect. So that influenced me to have that in my own work, I think. Taking a reflected image and reverse it to right reading. So you're actually creating a picture that you would see if you're standing there, but unlike anything that you could actually make in the camera. So that was my intent. Photographing, more than 2 years apart, I find fascinating as well. There's an awful lot that goes into it, with the way I create my work. And, now I'm mostly based, in the studio. I spent a lot of years creating these pictures, this work from about 2009 to the reflection series, I guess I did through 2016. And I do have some that I made out in Pacific Northwest, which are really cool too. I come from a commercial art background. As a graphic designer and graphic artist, digital artist. And I was influenced by a lot of other photographers who shoot in the studio. And that's always what I wanted to get in more into that. Found out what the pictures are and where they were coming from, particularly with the reflection series. It's all based in, you're all the way back to my childhood. And a lot of us photograph based on memories from our childhood and, places we've been series. So, and I found out through that work what the pictures were, why they, where they were coming from. And so I felt like resolved with that and was able to move on to other things.
No, that's great. All right. Well, thank you for sharing these images with us and digging into the background and the reason why you captured it and your styling. But I have a few more questions to ask you.
Yeah, sounds great.
All right, James, question number one. Was there a defining moment when you realized photography was more than just a hobby or a creative outlet?
I wouldn't say it was a moment, but a period in time. I started photography in high school, very much interested in it. But then, I'm also a musician, and that was my main career focus back then, up until when I started doing, graphics and graphic design. And then that led me back to photography through working with these photographers in the Red Bank area. The designer I worked for said, you really got great talent. You might consider that as a career. And I chose, photography instead.
Fantastic. Now, besides your fine art that you're sharing with us and also that you have with Photo Art Pavilion, you're a commercial photographer. So what other elements of photography do you do? What do you love to do?
I do product mostly. I was just trying to find my niche, I guess, because when I first got serious about photography and realized that was going to be my career, I was still, working. I worked at a design studio, I worked at a full service marketing advertising agency. I thought, based on my experiences working with these other photographers, they all were people photographers. And the other guy did product. And at the time I thought, well, yeah, I don't really want to do that. I thought I enjoy creating, abstract sets in the studio and, photographing these different products, especially when you can backlight them, like glass and bottles, things like that. And so I just really got into that, and that's what I've been doing mostly. But I've also photographed restaurants and food. I also do some portraits, bands that want, band portraits. So I do that. But yeah,
you do a little bit of everything, but primarily more product is your mainstream.
Right.
Okay.
I come from doing all this stuff, and architecture and, interiors, and I still will do that, but I kind of just got into the product, and that's what I've been focusing on. I really enjoy doing that. Yeah. So.
All right. Is there a place in the world that you have visited, photographed, experienced that basically has changed you in any way?
The only place I've really gone, and well, I lived in Florida for a while, and I photographed the smaller towns or cities there, like Sarasota. Didn't quite have the same architecture, though, but then also the Pacific Northwest. I went out to for about half a year, 10 years ago, and I was photographing a town on Puget Sound. It was actually supposed to have been what Seattle is. They were going to bring the railroad across. But, then there was a depression or an economic downturn at the end of the 19th century, and that just stopped that. The railroad never made it out there. So Seattle became like the big city. But this place is called Port Townsend, and it's this 19th century town with all these amazing buildings, just what I loved, because I saw pictures of it. It's like, I've got to go there.
I was there. It's amazing.
I made some good reflections there, the final reflections in of my overall series. So I don't know if those really changed me. It was doing more of the same thing that I'm interested in.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing everything about your styling, what interests you, and the details behind everything you're doing. Understand a little bit more, especially about architecture, and then your styling. It was such a pleasure to be able to sit with you and to be able
Thanks
to
for the
have a conversation.
opportunity.
You're welcome.
Really enjoyed it.
It is. It's great.
Being serious about photography and really creating meaningful work, there's an awful lot that goes into it. Your life goes into it. Rewarding it in a number of ways, not just creating the final product, but also understanding yourself and where the imagery comes from.
Well, it's amazing. And that's part of the fun of being a creative, right? You get to learn
Absolutely.
the different ways and be exposed. And I feel like every photographer has a different recipe, and the different photographers that you connect with, that you follow, that you learn about, all mix up into a different version of an artist, right? It's your own creative recipe of art. And
Right.
thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity, Jessica. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us today on Art and Soul Pavilion Perspectives, where every artist has a story and every story brings their art to life. A huge thank you to James T. Callahan for sharing his stories with us. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. What part of James's story resonated with you most? Which image of his did you like? We would love to hear from you. To explore his work or learn more about Photo Art Pavilion, check out the links below. We'll see you next time with another artist, more stories, and more soul behind the art. Thank you for joining us.